Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yuracek.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Jotthe Kannappan. Did I say that correctly, or is it okay? Josie. Okay. So she is an associate at Intuitive Ventures, which is a VC, which is all about converging robotic systems, digital tools, and clinical needs in search of new ways to understand, diagnose, and treat and manage disease. So basically helping next generation medical device therapeutics, everything like this, bring that into fruition. So Josie, was that good? Do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Sure. No, that's a great intro. And Laden, thank you so much for having me on today. It's a delight to be here.
Excellent. So yeah, we talked a little bit before, but you guys focus on this kind of digital health and next generation therapeutics. So do you want to talk about the, thesis of Intuitive Ventures and what it's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fundamental mission of Intuitive Ventures is to accelerate the future of minimally invasive care. Now, there are a whole wide variety of different disciplines and different tools and different technologies that fit into the world of minimally invasive care, which is why it's useful to think of us as a broad range healthcare investor that has a thesis in minimally invasive care that applies to digital, therapeutic, diagnostic ecosystems, and the tangential ecosystems that are relevant to minimally invasive care. In the process of doing that, we're building a disciplined, sustainable investment platform that offers both strategic and financial returns to our parent company, Intuitive Surgical. Now, many are familiar with Intuitive Surgical as the pioneer in the world of surgical robotics. But really, we see them as a pioneer in minimally invasive care. And so we're really doubling down on their commitment to the convergence of robotic systems and digital tools and clinical need to search for really new ways to understand and diagnose and treat and manage disease. I will also say that we're really technically minded. We're a really technically minded venture capital group. So we really look in our investments for a common thread of rigorous, scientifically backed innovation that's going to meet a clinical need. It really does come back to our mission. It's about the patient at the end of the day. And so it needs to be something that is driving better outcomes for patients and providers and hospitals and healthcare system.
Okay, sounds good. And then how long have you guys been around? How long has the, Intuitive Surgical, the parent company, been around? And do you want to talk about some of your investments so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fund has been around since 2020. It was initiated then. Intuitive Surgical was founded in 1995, so significantly before the fund was started. Our investments to date range across a few of the verticals that I mentioned. So we have a couple investments in digital, a couple investments in device, and one in therapeutics. But one of our digital investments is in Flywheel, Flywheel.io. They are a company that focuses on really structuring data in the research setting in healthcare. We understand that most data in the research setting is really complex and fragmented. And so the ability to structure it in a way that enables insight and innovation off of it is a really incredible enabling tool for a lot of companies that are developing other digital tools. So anybody working in the world of AI really needs good data to train their AI on. And Flywheel is in the business of being able to help people do that. Another digital investment we have is Keela Health, who is thinking about the world of perioperative care and the things that may or may not drive complications. And so really using AI to enable better surgical outcomes for patients who are getting surgery. On the device side, we have a couple of different companies. Endogenix is a platform that uses a novel type of energy to treat metabolic disease in a focal way. I'm sure you'll hear me in a little bit talk about, a bit more about focal therapeutics, but Endogenix is our go-to example of that. They're a great company really thinking about targeting disease at a site of disease as opposed to systemically. And we have a couple investments in stealth as well, as some in metabolic disease, some in oncology. And yeah, we're always looking for more companies to invest in.
Yeah, excellent. So do you guys, this is a neurotechnology and brain-computer interface show. What's your guys' thoughts on this? And what's attractive about neurotechnology, or maybe not attractive?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And certainly neuroscience and neurology and neurosurgery are a fascinating world, have a lot of innovation currently occurring in them. One of the obvious answers to this question is, as Intuitive Surgical, we are a pioneer in the world of surgical robotics. So robotics that are used in neurosurgery are something that we find particularly interesting. We think there's a lot of value propositions that robotics can bring to the world of neurosurgery. And so looking at a few of the companies in that space is really fascinating. The other thing that I think is really an enabling technology to neurosurgery and the treatment of neurological disease largely is, again, this idea of focal therapy. So we know that many drugs in the past, many interventions for neurological disease have struggled because of the blood-brain barrier. It's an evolutionary thing that helps us, protects us from pathogens, but it also decreases the efficacy of a lot of drugs because they're filtered out of the bloodstream before they can actually get to the brain. Now, if we were treating disease outside of disease instead of systemically, so instead of in the bloodstream, we were treating in the CNS, that'd be a different story. So there's a really particularly interesting set of applications for focal therapies in the CNS. And that includes things like energy. It could include ablation. It could include focused radiation. It could include implants, as the name of this podcast. It could include local delivery of drug. It could include gene therapies, cell therapies, immunotherapies. A lot of the different interventions that are being developed that can be applied focally and on the right side of the blood-brain barrier are really interesting.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, when a company might want to come to you and is looking for funding, what are you looking for and how would they be able to secure funding from you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, like I said, we are mission-driven people. So the first and foremost thing is, are they meeting an unmet need in the world of healthcare? That's the driving factor behind any healthcare startup, and it should be. Beyond that, we're really looking for rigor and nuance in a lot of the typical categories that healthcare investors look for: regulatory strategy, reimbursement strategy, what sort of clinical data or preclinical data has been collected to date, the actual technological backbone of what you're doing and how much that has been fleshed out, whether there's been validation there. We obviously also really look at the team and their experience and their commitment to what they're working on. Entrepreneurs are heroic figures in my experience. And so really being able to see a team that is impassioned about the work that they're doing and the change that they will hopefully be able to make through their company is a big portion of it. Beyond that, it's useful in the world of venture capital to think about investing as management of risk, right? We're really excited about the ends that we're enabling by putting our capital into companies that are doing really cool things. But what we're essentially doing when we're making a decision to invest or not is figuring out where the greatest sources of risk a company might face are and how they have gone about de-risking them. And so for different platforms, that's going to be different things. But so long as the company has, again, really been rigorous in addressing their key challenges or the key things that may make or break them, that's really what we're looking for.
Interesting. And then is the potential use of a Da Vinci robot something that factors into it? That's what the parent company is known for. So if it somehow integrates that, does that help or hurt?
It's a great question, Ladin. So I think that the correct answer is it's somewhat agnostic, right? Again, meant to be anything in the world of minimally invasive care, and delivery is certainly a portion of that puzzle. We are thinking about how to make an intervention the least traumatic it can possibly be. And we know that Da Vinci's are very good at doing that, particularly beyond other laparoscopic surgery or other open surgery. But they are one of many tools. And that's one of the beauties of our investing platform. We get to invest in things that may work with a Da Vinci, but also may work with other surgical robotic platforms or non-robotic platforms that are ultimately innovating in this entire ecosystem of minimally invasive care.
Okay, very nice. Hey guys, just a quick pause to talk about our show sponsor, Iris Biomedical. Iris Biomedical provides a portfolio of neural sensing and simulation platforms and components to accelerate early-stage medical device companies through preclinical and early feasibility studies. Iris is an ideal partner for companies with limited budgets or resources to invest in developing a new platform from the ground up. Their experienced engineering team, in-house cleanroom facilities, and ISO 13485 certified quality management system allow for prototyping and early-stage commercial production. Be sure to tell them you heard about it on the Neural Implant Podcast. That'll really help us out. Thanks. Now, back to the show. So it sounds like the companies you invest in are a little bit further stage. It's not just like an idea a few people put together, that they've already had, like you said, data and maybe clinical trials or something like this. So they may be like Series A, B, something further along. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we consider ourselves an early stage investor. So seed, Series A, Series B is the range we typically give, where Series A is really the sweet spot. And I think that the typical stuff that we're looking for is a reasonable amount of technical de-risking but we're willing to take some of the clinical risk. So an example here is with most device companies, we're excited to see really good preclinical animal data and are willing to invest before our first in human, but we're always excited to see early clinical results as well. So again, it's about balancing risk.
Yeah. What's exciting for you guys at the moment? What's obviously can't talk about ongoing projects, but what's something that's got you especially, captivated recently?
Yeah. So I mentioned the idea of neural focal therapies, right? So there are a few companies in this space that are really interesting, particularly as we're thinking about, again, that delivery piece that I just mentioned. So if we're thinking about minimally invasive care in neurosurgery, what does that look like? Is that an endovascular platform that has neurological applications? Is that a burr hole through cranial surgery? Is that a completely incisionless platform? There are a variety of delivery mechanisms here and specific things that are enabled by certain delivery mechanisms or considered impossible through other delivery mechanisms. Energy is a really great example of a focal therapy that can be incisionless, right? We've seen HIFU for focused ultrasound being a potentially incisionless platform. We've seen stereotactic radiosurgery have, really large adoption for specific clinical indications. And so thinking about other types of energy that may be able to target similar or different disease states that are currently unaddressed by incisionless platforms on the market. Thinking about in the implant world, there are people working on post-resection implants. If you've had a craniotomy or you've had a burr hole surgery and you've removed cancerous tissue, can you put something in the brain to prevent the regrowth of cancerous tissue? And so there are companies focusing on leaving radioactive particles behind or leaving drug behind, something that is able to dose slowly and stay in the tissue in order to prevent recurrence of cancer. So yeah, lots of really interesting companies in that space. The one other one I'll mention, there's a company developing a cell therapy actually for progressive MS that can be delivered intrathecally. So something that, again, is not delivered directly into the brain, but on the right side of the CNS and has the ability to localize in some of the lesions that are created in progressive MS and is seeing pretty interesting clinical results.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. And a lot of it is outside of this. I guess it is still minimally invasive, but it is outside of maybe the surgery scope a little bit in my mind. But yeah, I'm very curious, especially what your day-to-day looks like and what kind of levels of rejection you have to dish out and what kind of percentages and everything like this, people that come through the door looking for money versus that actually get funded in the end.
No, it's an excellent question. And one of the great benefits and privileges of my job is that I get to interact with so many excited entrepreneurs who are thrilled to bring their idea to somebody who might be able to fund it. I'll start by saying that it's an immense privilege to be able to do that. As far as what my day-to-day looks like, it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of talking to entrepreneurs. It's a lot of talking to key opinion leaders. It's a lot of talking to different experts that we have internally who can provide insight on reimbursement or regulatory strategy, who might be able to provide some insight on a specific clinical condition. In the process of diligence, we're going through a lot of these really thorough conversations with experts from these different perspectives on a specific company's strategy. Aside from that, we do a lot of landscape development in order to be able to have really informed investment theses in the verticals that we decide to invest in. We want to have an informed opinion by the time we're having conversations with companies. And so that, again, is similarly talking to experts, doing a lot of the market sizing and some of that desk work beforehand to really understand what's happening in a space when we're looking at the companies operating in it. To your question about what rejection looks like in VC, the way that I like to think about it, and this is the type of investor that I like being, is it's not about rejection. It's about enabling the best possible fit between an entrepreneur and an investor who's able to really do what the company needs for them. So it's about the two-way street between an investor and an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs should similarly be extremely choosy about the investors that they seek out. They want people who are not just capital. They want people who are able to provide really valuable insight on the problems that they're working on and the things that they're sorting through in their company. In some ways, it's not so much a practice of trial and rejection as it is seeing if two jigsaw pieces fit together.
Yeah, for sure. It is a kind of maybe like a process of dating, and there is a lot of rejection involved in that. But eventually, it's almost a marriage, and you have to really tolerate it, tolerate each other, and find each other's opinions bearable at the very least. But yeah, okay. So let's say some entrepreneurs are listening and they want to come talk to you. So is there a best way to reach out to you? Is obviously they should have they should have some data that their device works, or the method, or whatever works. What other tips or tricks are there to maybe get your attention and maybe get a successful interaction out of it?
Oh, no, that's a great question. And the first thing I'll say is any entrepreneur looking for an investor, always have a low barrier for reaching out. It's really exciting. I mentioned earlier that we consider ourselves an early stage investor, and you mentioned the idea of having certain amounts of data beforehand. We love having interactions with companies when they're too early for us to invest in. It's really great for us to get to know what a company is working on and really get to know the team and how they're thinking about problems and potentially pivoting earlier in their story than it might be time for a check. So really having a low barrier for reaching out, I think, is a gold standard in VC. You want to have a relationship before there's any money crosses the table. Beyond that, I think the typical things that stand out are really well, clearly articulated message. Again, about an unmet medical need is something that comes across really strongly in a first interaction or a first email. A deck that's streamlined and clean and similarly articulates that vision while also articulating some of the nuance around some of the hairier subjects that we tend to see in healthcare, including, again, regulatory, reimbursement, product market fit, commercial, go-to-market, those things. But I really do think that, entrepreneurs should absolutely reach out at any time. We're excited to learn about what's happening in the field. So to your question about what the best way to reach me is, my email is on our website. We also have a form on the Intuitive Ventures website that we actually respond to every day. It's part of our job. We look through the inbounds there.
Wow, that's really cool. And you must really be a social butterfly to handle that many meetings. I think I know some people that would get very much discharged after even 2 or 3 meetings.
Oh, it's a funny thing. I actually consider myself quite an introvert, but it's fun to be around energized people. And I think it is a rare quality of most of the meetings that venture groups get to have. We're talking to people who are excited to talk to us and who are excited about the things that they're working on pretty much universally. So it's nice to feed off the energy of other folks.
That's really cool. Yeah. So what are some of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, we get to see a lot of really wonderful companies in the ecosystem that we are looking at, but our threshold for investing is extremely high, right? Like I mentioned earlier, we're investing in companies where we really see that we can bring a strong value add to that company, and that we see as really technically and clinically meaningful. So there are many considerations that go into that assessment. As I mentioned, we're thinking about this from a variety of different lenses, from that product market fit, that regulatory, that reimbursement, commercial, clinical, all of those things. But at the end of the day, it's about finding game-changing startups and entrepreneurs who are going to benefit from our investment and our industry wisdom. So I would say, as far as challenges, it's similar to your analogy about dating, right? It's finding the people who are most excited to work with us and for whom we think we can provide the greatest value.
Yeah, very cool. That's and it definitely you're tying up your money, and it's a big commitment for many years. So it's definitely understandable. I guess if you're in the process, you're just like, I wish people would give me money, but a lot of times it can be more prudent not to have to go through that. So yeah, if you had unlimited funding, what would you do with it?
Oh man, gosh, there are so many things in the world of healthcare that need fixing. It's funny because one thing that I care very deeply about is equity and access to care. So in the world of unlimited funding, I do think many of the problems associated with social determinants of health and unequal access to care are about funding. So if we can find ways to fund better access to care universally, to fund clinical trials that have representative patient populations to the patients that those interventions may actually be used on, if we can fund access to healthcare, be it as simple as transportation, Ubers, buses, to be able to get from certain neighborhoods to more medically served neighborhoods that have a larger number of institutions. The pandemic has been a really interesting force in the adoption of telehealth, right? So it has driven the adoption of telehealth which does increase access in some ways because of it. Right now, it takes an internet connection to get your doctor. But it does also increase a lot of disparities. We've seen a lot of the socioeconomic disparities in this country exacerbated in the world of the pandemic. And we're really seeing that there is a true disparity in care based on, socioeconomic status, based on race, based on gender, based on a whole wide variety of demographics. So that's probably unlimited funding. That's where I'd start.
Yeah, you're like, how much unlimited? How much are we talking about? Okay, so maybe let's go back to this dating analogy. Maybe something that's really bad is like using a bad pickup line or something like this. What's the equivalent for that you're just like, oh, no, not this again? When it comes across your desk, you slap your head.
Oh, man. Again, the very first thing is it's a common pitfall to be a technology that's searching for a need as opposed to a need-driven technology. So that's something that technologies and needs find each other in really specific ways, but the best interventions are always ones that are driven by a really thorough understanding of a need in healthcare. I think there's a famous innovator quote that I cannot correctly attribute, but that 95% of a solution is understanding the problem. And so that's something that we really look for. And the absence of that is noticeable when it does occur. The other thing that I would mention that I think is a go-to in the world of healthcare these days is our favorite tabloid story, Theranos. People like to say that there is a fine line between selling and lying. I think many people of good conscience know that there is a distinct difference. We understand passion or articulating a grand vision, and that is distinctly different than lying about progress and lying about development. And lying ultimately to patients. The greatest travesty of the Theranos story is not that they defrauded investors. It's that patients received bad care and were ultimately harmed in the process of that device and that service being offered to the greater population. And that's just something that should never happen in the world of healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. It's one thing to be like, to have grand promises and be like, oh, next year we're going to be awesome. But you do have to be truthful with what's going on now, especially when it comes to human lives and everything like this too. So that's very understandable. Has that affected you guys in any way, or have you, I don't know, had any repercussions from this?
No, honestly, it's been something to just watch happening in the stories, but it is certainly a conversation that comes up very frequently, right? People have paid attention to that story and how it has unwound, particularly also the regulatory loopholes around lab developed tests and how to be somebody who can develop lab developed tests in an ethical way is a conversation that comes up. I have a diagnostics background. I worked at a molecular diagnostics company for a few years before my MBA. So Theranos was something that was very apparent in my life for a few years because it certainly did have an impact on investing climate. There were suddenly investors who wanted to be more thorough. And I think that's always a good thing. A company being thorough and investors being thorough is
yeah, for sure. So I bet you guys probably smelled a rat long before the general public. Yeah. So if we are talking about broader environmental or things in the air or something like this that we can't control, maybe political trends or something like this, or things that may or may not happen. Obviously, this is being recorded after the pandemic. I'm wondering how that may have affected things, and then maybe even like something like a Russia-Ukraine conflict, which we're currently experiencing right now. How does that affect you guys and the investment landscape?
It's a great question, Lada. And truth be told, we know the world is ever changing, right? That no year is the same as a year prior. And one of the great privileges of our job, again, is really being on the cutting edge. We're seeing technologies that are used to an evolving landscape. They're used to scientific understanding changing. They're used to what's available on the market changing at any given time. It's dynamic. It is a dynamic world. And at any given time, of course, there are macro forces that affect investing. But there are two ways to think about it, right? There's a subset that would say that the macro should completely drive whether an investor is thinking about deploying capital or not. I think most investors would argue that investors are going to be deploying capital where they think it matters. And so the macro might inform what they think matters, but they are still going to be deploying capital. And they're still looking for companies who are excellent at what they do and excellent at addressing the problems that they are trying to solve. The pandemic was a really good example of this, right? So you're thrown into this state of chaos in the world of healthcare. It became very clear that patients were going to need to find a way to access care that was not going to be in person. And suddenly you see this entire ecosystem develop around funding telehealth and bringing that as an opportunity to patients. And now an ongoing conversation is also about how to sustain that. We don't want this to be something that is just a blip during the course of the pandemic. We want to be thinking about bringing the site of care to a patient's home, where it's much more accessible, and thinking about all of the other services that go with a doctor's appointment and seeing if there's a way to be able to do that in a less invasive way to patients. Another great example there is, of course, the development of the vaccine and mRNA therapies generally, right? We knew that there had been some development beforehand, but when the pandemic put really strong pressure on development timelines, mRNA became an amazing platform to be able to do this quickly with and to be able to deploy across the ecosystem. And investors were able to put money into that when they saw that it was going to be an excellent solution to what we needed at that point in time. So to answer your question briefly, of course, the macro affects how we think about problems, but not so much the idea that we do or don't deploy capital.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think that's quite wise. And yeah, I mean, so I heard some of the best companies, I think like UPS and I don't know, Microsoft or whatever, the companies that have been around for a long time, that they were started in recessions. And if you're able to weather these kinds of, like you were saying, macroeconomic forces, then that probably means it's a more powerful company that's probably apt to last a little bit longer. But Jotthe, this has been really nice. I've really enjoyed this talk. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me, Aladdin.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.